Good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's WeatherBrains, episode 942 for the 5th of February, 2024. And you know what today is? It is National Weather Person Day. I know that because every year our friends at Bluebell Ice Cream, they're so nice, they bring us these big tubs of ice cream. And come on, who doesn't like ice cream? I mean, goodness gracious. And I don't like to call attention to ourselves that much, but whatever. It is National Weather Person's Day. Um, so there you go. And by the way, this is the pre-show, the magical part of this program, where we primarily do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time, we say very outrageous things. Yeah, buddy, it's the Monday night weather party. See if we can find something outrageous to talk about before we start the show. And if you're looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 7 minutes, and that's when it starts. Um, and I know we've got some outages tonight. Bill Murray is out. I do believe Neil is out, and I do believe Rick is out. I think Neil is still recovering from the AMS meeting in Baltimore last week. But hopefully Kim will be on. We can debrief her a little bit. And let's see if we can bring in our special guest for this evening. But yeah, actually some folks brought us these big jugs of iced tea today from Milo's. So to our friends at Milo's and our friends at Bluebell, thanks a lot for the treats. We typically, when you do what we do, you just you don't get a lot of thank yous, you don't get a lot of nice things. So it's always nice. Colonel, how you doing?
I am doing very well. Thank you for asking, sir.
Thanks for your time. We know you're busy.
Well, good.
We promise we will get you out as quickly as we can. And just so you will know, we disclose this to everybody that's on here. We are live on YouTube now. We will join local television at the top of the hour. And about 75% of the people that consume this, they listen to it. And the podcast version will be out early tomorrow. But just so you'll know, we're live. And we always like to disclose that because you never, not that you would say anything that you did not want the people to hear, but I appreciate it when people tell me that we're live. So there you go. How have you been?
I've been well. Things are going great over here at UA. So it's been.
Have you gotten used to the culture of Tuscaloosa, Alabama yet?
I'm trying. I'm spending most of my career in Washington D.C. That colors you a certain way. I'm trying to. I'm definitely trying to adjust to a non-rat race environment for sure.
What's interesting, my wife's father was an Army colonel at the Pentagon, and they came to Tuscaloosa from Washington, D.C. Very similar circumstances, and it took a little adjustment to get into the culture. He actually came to Tuscaloosa to become the professor of military science at the University of Alabama.
Ah,
He ran the ROTC program, and then he retired and went into development at the university. So he worked in development there and at Rose administration for quite a while. But he was over in the Army. They lived all over, Army brat. I think the hardest part was having to go ask this guy if I could marry his daughter. That was thoroughly intimidating.
did he have a shotgun by the door when you went up there?
Yes, yes, yes. And I mean, you could just look at this guy and your knuckles would fall apart. I mean, it's not good. But no, Colonel O'Meary was very well known in Tuscaloosa. He passed away a few years ago, but I didn't have a dad, and he really became my father, and I really miss him because he was so smart. And goodness, all of the experiences he's had, it was just incredible.
And if he
Jen,
was,
how you doing? Jen, how
I'm
you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you. Should I call you Colonel or is it? Make sure. How do I say your last name? Because I'll be introducing you
it,
tonight.
it's Gramillion.
Vermillion. Got
So I'm not a New Orleans person, which would be Grimion if I was from there, but I'm not. So
it. Vermillion. Gotcha. Thank you. It's so nice to meet you.
it's nice meeting you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bill, Colonel, and I call him Colonel. I call my father-in-law Colonel. That's just,
Yeah, I will.
I can't help it. Once a colonel, you're always a colonel. You know that.
Yes, and I'm trying to unmilitarize myself being at the university because they don't know what to do with me. So you probably appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, I totally appreciate that. Uh, but Bill Murray, I think, contacted you.
Yeah.
He's typically leading the discussion. Bill is out this evening, and he is traveling. So Jen will be kind of guiding us, and we'll jump in as we go along here. But again, we have shortened the show here. We got to where the show was 2 hours, which is a little much.
Yeah.
People are busy, and now there is such a glut of content where people consume things, podcasts and Hulu and Netflix. I mean, there's only so much time in the day to consume this stuff. And so we've tried to shorten this a little bit and tighten it up a little bit for folks. So we'll do our best to get you out on time.
You're good.
Now, is your family moved to Tuscaloosa with you, or?
My wife did, yes. So
Okay.
So we are all in on the University of Alabama, even though that's not not where I grew up, or not the school I would cheer for, but that's okay. I do red occasionally.
Have you had a chance to meet the new football coach?
I haven't. So
I have not either. I would talk with Coach Saban on a very regular basis. I did weather support for him for the whole time he was here, and I will miss our conversations. We got to be buddies, but I'm really happy for him. I do his radio show. He loves weather. The guy's a weather dweeb, and
I did not know that.
Oh, he loves weather, and in fact, we need to get him on this show. But he on the radio show, I could tell he just was tired, and I could just see a little different countenance about him, and he, So I'm very happy for him, but I'm very excited to meet the new coach. But I was actually an electrical engineering major at the university for 3 years before changing schools, and I would go on to finish in meteorology. But
that's funny because I did the very same thing. I started out as a double E.
Really?
And looked at the course book and looked around and said, crap, I don't want to lose all my math and physics and chemistry. Yeah. What major can choose? And so meteorology chose me.
It worked out very well. It really worked out well. All right. So welcome to our television viewers. We're here at the top of the hour. It is 7:00 Central Time. And welcome to our Monday night weather party. Things are nice and calm. So we got Troy, James A., Jen. I think Neil probably cannot make it. I think Rick is out tonight and Bill is out tonight. But anyway, let's get this thing started here. So let's record track A and record track B. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Join the American Meteorological Society by becoming a member of the band. The AMS Weather Band is a global community of weather enthusiasts dedicated to learning and sharing their love of science. Visit amsweatherband.org to learn more and join the band today.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
You heard it. Bill Curtis said we're kind of a big deal. If he says it, maybe we are a big deal. I don't know. Well, welcome to WeatherBrains. This is the show that's all about weather. This is episode number 942. 942. We are in our 18th year. This is for the 5th of February, 2024. And Troy Kimmel, you know what this day is? It's National Weather Person Day.
Yes, it is. It is.
So has anybody thank you for being a weather person today?
I've seen quite a few messages for our colleagues in the Weather Service and TV and radio folks and even private sector mats. So I've seen a little bit of everything on anti-social media. So
the one thing that happens here every year, and I don't know, maybe it happens in Tulsa, but Bluebell will deliver these big tubs of ice cream to the weather people.
That was a Texas thing at first, because I remember back way in the day when they'd come over from Brenham, Texas, and do that at TV stations where I've been, and that of course led to this.
Yeah.
And then in Milo's, which is this local chain of restaurants, they brought some tea, and their tea is really good. So
All right.
I'm feeling the love. James ate a lot. Did you get any love today?
Yeah, Bluebell brought us some ice cream. They checked about a week ago to what our favorite flavor was, so we were able to get something we all liked. And Milo's has a tea brewery in Tulsa now, by the way.
Ooh,
It is
okay.
dandy tea. Yes,
It
sir.
really is. Well, let's get to I mean, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? What did you request?
I did the cookie two-step, which is kind of like Oreo's ground in vanilla ice cream, and not too sweet, just about right.
Wow.
What's interesting to me is James and Mike and Jen is that what a marketing move on behalf of the ice cream of the folks that,
Absolutely.
I mean, go after the weather people, go after the meteorologist and feed them ice cream. Let's see how that would work many years ago. The first market, you got to realize they probably started this out somewhere down here in a market, and it's just taken off like wildfire. I think it's a great marketing ploy.
Oh, it's outstanding. They have a big operation down in Sylacauga, Alabama. Not as big as Brenham, the original there, but still, it's good. Well, this is not ice cream brains. This is weather brains, and let me just say that
I want
Bill
ice
Murray
cream
is
now. Thanks.
Yes, that's right. Bill is well, it's either 50-cent beer night at Hooters or a pub crawl, one of the two. So
Or
Jen
he's in a
Naramore,
snowbank. He's in a snowbank somewhere.
yeah, he's been on a trip. I mean,
Yeah,
he
he
went to
has
the
been.
Chaser Summit, and then he went to I think Colorado and then California in the middle of all this. So he could be buried under mountains of snow. But
Yeah.
Jen has been so kind to take over the lead the interview segment. So Jen, let's bring in our special guest. I'm excited about tonight's show.
Me too. Yeah. And even though he goes on these frequent pub crawls, he does write wonderful questions and introductions. So I'm going to read those. So tonight's guest, WeatherBrain, currently serves as the director of the Global Water Security Center at the Alabama Water Institute, the University of Alabama, with a focus on providing decision makers with reliable information and innovative research on water and environmental security. He leads efforts to understand their impacts on society. His career prior to this role spanned 27 years as a command meteorologist in the U.S. Air Force, supporting both military operations and the intelligence community with critical weather forecasting and analysis. Colonel Mike Ramillion, retired U.S. Air Force, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on tonight. It's a great honor to be with such an esteemed panel.
Well, we are honored to be with you, and I'm excited to learn more about who you are. And so we're just going to start. We do this with a lot of our guests. Take us back to the beginnings. What is your background, and what led you to a career that's focused on meteorology and oceanography as well?
So as an undergrad, I went to the University of Kansas. There, I had an ROTC scholarship. That was my mechanism to be able to afford to go to college, because growing up as a small town kid in Southwest Missouri, didn't have much money, but I wanted to get out of the town, and that ROTC scholarship was what led me to have the opportunity to get an education. And so I went to the University of Kansas. I started out as an electrical engineer. Discovered after 3 years of doing it that it really wasn't my cup of tea. And so I opened up the college catalog and said, hey, what can I use my math and my physics and all the other stuff that you have to take as an engineer? And meteorology actually picked me. And so I started the 2-year journey of that. And then once I graduated from the University of Kansas, got commissioned into the Air Force and began my 27-year journey as a meteorologist supporting the Department of Defense.
Colonel, I've got a quick question for you. The world's most patient person is also from Southwest Missouri. That's my wife. So where were you from in Southwest Missouri?
So it's a small town called Crane, Missouri.
Okay.
No stoplights, 1,100 people. It's about 35 miles southwest of Springfield and about 20 miles west of Branson. So I I grew up on Table Rock Lake.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with that area.
Absolutely. Her parents had a house on Table Rock for a while, and it's a beautiful lake. What were some of your best deployments?
So I ended up, through the course of my career, ended up being almost a policy wonk, and spent a lot of time in the Pentagon. So I only had 2 deployments over the course of my career. The first one was to Saudi Arabia. I got back home right before 9/11. And so I had 4 months in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. Got to learn a lot about dust storms and what they look like in the Middle East. And of course, places like Phoenix occasionally gets those kinds of sandstorms where it blacks out the whole city and you can't see 5 inches in front of your face. And then the second one is not a deployment. People will laugh at what I say. I went to Tampa and I worked 8 months in their operations center at night, directing information flowing in and out of the theater there, which is now really, really busy. But I did that for 8 months. So those are the only 2 deployments that I had in my career.
Awesome. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So kind of take us through, could I look at a couple of these questions here, but how has your military and scientific experience influenced your approach to studying and managing water resources? Did you transition into that?
So, obviously, so in the Air Force, what happens in the Air Force is that we provide support to the Air Force, to the Army, and the intelligence community. And obviously, the Army, with boots on the ground, is very keenly interested in water. They've got to be able to take their tanks and cross rivers, and Apaches land in mud, and all those different things where water meets terra firma, and you have issues on how that all operates and what kind of mobility and everything that you had. And so yes, I'm a meteorologist, but obviously I predict when it rains, what's it going to do to operations and all those kinds of things. But in reality, the center that I'm now sitting in is really, I tell people, if we get water right, which I don't think our nation, our world really fully understands water and the drought and all those other kinds of things. But it's what I found in the last part of my career in DC was we really don't understand climate very well. We talk a good game, but we really really don't understand it. And so when I stepped out of the service, I was recruited to come here from Senator Shelby's staff and the University of Alabama to come here to really look at water issues for our nation. And so there's been U.S. Strategies on water, droughts and what's its influences on diseases and migration and all those kinds of issues that we see on it, that if you're paying attention to the world stage, you see how water is shifting everything around us, and we're having to adapt and mitigate to those things. So being a meteorologist and doing policy support at the climate, it was just a natural extension to say, if I get water right, I get the understanding of climate, whether it's subseasonal, seasonal forecasting out to a year, to 5 years, to 10 years and longer. But I was really inspired, and why I was recruited here is we really got to understand water better, because it's going to shift how we view our worlds. And so even like the Mayan kings and the Aztecs, they built their empires and their civilization around water. And so if those civilizations and around down in the Mesoamerica, they understood the water. And when water during the medieval war period started disappearing, their civilizations collapsed. We see that with the Anasazi Indians in the southwest part of the United States. So it's always keenly interested, but now I'm in a job that allows me to explore that better, to help our nation understand what the value of water really means to society, and then be able to operationalize it and have those conversations with USAID and State Department and DOD and many others, to be able to kind of tie all that together to have a better grasp of that.
Mike, Troy Kimmel here. Thank you, sir, for joining us tonight. And also thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
Mike, I was going to save this question till we got to the end, but you've addressed it now.
Okay.
At the University of Texas here in our classes in intro weather and climate, we don't offer an undergraduate degree. And in my geography of Texas class, I sit there and look at students and I try to explain them the biggest issue in Texas over the next 100 years will be water.
Yep.
And I think people look at me like I've got 27 horns growing on my head. Lord knows I only got 25. But the bottom line, Mike, is what the public, they don't get this. I think in Texas, and especially Micah State out here, where half of it are the haves and half of it is the have-nots, because moisture deficit versus moisture surplus. How in heaven's name, Mike, are we ever going to get the public to understand this before it comes and bites us in the butt, frankly? I guess that's the question.
So, I mean, that's one of the things that we're trying to tackle is how do you as you work in the profession of trying to explain meteorology and tornadoes and all those kinds of things, obviously you're well tuned to the communication of how to communicate the impacts. And so one of the things we're trying to figure out is for water and those kinds of issues, how do we communicate it better so that people can understand it? I mean, your state climatologist in the state of Texas, John Nielsen Gammon,
one of the best,
has gone on the record and said, listen, even before all the influx of the last 3 or 4 years, he has tried his best to articulate to the state government a really strong El Nino. I don't have enough water to support the population. And that's, again, prior to COVID and all the extra migrants into the state of Texas. And then obviously, it was a couple years ago, Texas, and I can't remember which nuclear power plant, but they had to shoot down a nuclear power plant because the cooling pond outside that power plant, the temperature of the cooling pond was the same temperature as the ambient. And so there was no cooling mechanism. So you had to shut down, power grids and stuff. So it's hard. For the state of Texas, it's really difficult. And that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out is if I can convince decision makers, so the politicians, the generals, and those kinds of things, and how do we articulate this to them so that the decision makers can lead that charge? And it's not easy.
But Mike, on the other hand, these decision makers, the politicians out here in this big damn granite building down the road here in the middle of town, they don't get it either, Mike. I just don't think they get it.
Yeah. So one of the things that we try to do, and again, born on, I call it the beatings and regrets why I was on active duty, is how do we simplistically tell the very hard story, right? So the data and scientists on one side have great science, but they can't communicate to the decision makers. And people like me as a colonel, I didn't have time to read the research and I'll say waste my time understanding the science and all the great research that's out there. And so one of the things I learned throughout my career is, it's kind of the keep it simple, stupid, KISS principle is how can I articulate the impacts in a very short form, Twitter-esque or XX or whatever it's now called, but, communication strategy. And so we've been working with people that I know within the federal government of, I'm going to give you a one-pager that tells you the story that you need to know. Am I hitting the mark? And so we work really hard on continuing to refine and there'll be a day that, that I will be able to have conversations with state government. I'm trying to focus at the federal government level at this point. But to be honest, to be fair, I don't want to get involved in the politics of water in the United States.
Yeah.
But I'd like to build our own foundation here. And so that's why we're called the Global Water Security Center, because we want to look at these issues globally. And if I begin to cut my teeth and and do it well for other parts of the world, I will eventually get drug into the politics here in the United States, but I try to stay away from it just because it's so ugly. I mean, Colorado River is just, or the Rio Grande, or in Texas. And so we are working hard. I don't have a perfect answer really to answer you, but trying really, really hard to come up with new, novel ways of communicating for the decision makers.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Mike, I want to back up just a minute. You got basically three entities there on campus. You've got the National Water Center, the Alabama Water Institute, the Global Water Security Center. If you would, just for those that are listening and watching, kind of explain each of those entities, what they do and how do they intertwine?
Yes, I would love to. So I'll give credit where credit's due. Senator Shelby is a very supportive, ardent supporter of water. And he understood the aspects and the understandings. And so his first recruitment was the NOAA's National Water Center here on this campus. And that was a center to begin to understand flooding and the issues that happen with storm surge and flooding, and how do we model the water going through all the different byways and rivers throughout the United States. And so that was planted here on the campus. About the same time, President Stuart Bell came to this university and said, hey, the University of Alabama, I'm sure he's in cahoots with Senator Shelby, was, hey, we need this university to focus on water research. And so the Alabama Water Institute was founded by Stuart Bell here on this campus to focus in on the research, to work with the National Water Center here on campus and find unique ways to be able to look at research here throughout our nation. And we were fortunate enough a couple years ago to get a cooperative institute for research to operations in hydrology. It's a NOAA cooperative institute that specifically looks at weather or water, because we really need. And so the University of Alabama is quickly becoming a kind of a centerpiece. And the one thing that you didn't mention, James, was hopefully in the next couple of months, the USGS will open their hydro instrumentation facility here on campus, moving it from Stennis, Mississippi up here. And so it'll have a 250-foot river on the inside of that building to test string gauges and understand and what kind of new technologies will be here on campus. So that, and again, Senator Shelby has been very vital for the University of Alabama to have the National Water Center, support of the Alabama Water Institute that does water research and engagements on the Hill and other places, and the USGS facility. We're becoming a kind of a center point for our nation, looking at all the water issues from, again, the observations from what USGS does to the modeling of the water, which is what NOAA does.
So how is your integration with the other NOAA national centers? Or is there any coordination between you and the national centers, WPC, SPC, NHC?
So obviously the Alabama Water Institute, which is my parent organization where my center happens to fall, obviously we deal with all the other cooperative institutes. And then how do we do better research for, let's pick the NHC, the Hurricane Center, on coastal compound flooding. 90% of the deaths on a hurricane is usually in that compounding flooding from storm surge and heavy rain, and those rivers and systems right along the coastal has extreme flooding. It's not just storm surge. And so obviously we have the Alabama Water Institute and the National Water Center have a lot of good conversations with like the Hurricane Center to try to understand what happens along the coastlines of the United States. They also work with WPC, obviously, to be able to put out those warnings. And then there's also in the United States, there's 9 river forecast centers in the United States. And so we try to do the best we can, trying to integrate with all the different National Weather Service INCEP centers to allow us to do a better job. Because again, I don't think we do as good a job articulating weather, which is kind of what Troy you were mentioning, or water, which you were kind of mentioning. And our nation needs to giddy up on it, before another Dust Bowl comes our way.
Yep. When does another Dust Bowl come our way?
I don't know. Looking out, in the climate models and some of those other things, precip is a very wide, strange variable in the climate models. And so the state of the science really doesn't handle precip very well right now. It's a hard entity because the resolutions don't resolve clouds. And of course, you have to have those silly, pesky things called clouds for it to rain, right? So it had a very hard time because of the resolution. I think science will get there one day. So I don't know if we have a definitive answer right now, other than let's have a conversation and let's not stick our head in the sand and be a little bit better prepared, with the science that we have, as opposed to just waiting until it comes upon us.
Mike, let me ask you this. Is there anything in that modeling where we take into account something that we see in the Southern Plains, the state of Texas, and that is the huge population growth here? That's one of the things that, we don't have that much control over, and I don't think people really understand that much, why that's important as far as water is concerned. And I assume it is.
Absolutely. I mean, they've got to, in other countries, where like we just did a study on Albania for some people in Europe, and 20% of their wastewater, or 20% of their population has access to clean water and wastewater treatment plants, right? And so we in the United States are spoiled in our first world problems and in trying to understand that. But again, to your earlier questions of how do we communicate that? How do we study if John Nielsen Gammon says I don't have enough water, how do I model the extra, I'll call it migration, if you will, into the state of Texas, and what does that mean for the capacity of the wastewater and all these other things to handle additional population? I don't think we do a very good job at that at all. And the hard sciences does not a very good job of working with the social sciences aspect. And I think this is an interdisciplinary problem that we got to look at much, much better. And I think if we, through here at the University of Alabama and like my center, looking at it from a global water security perspective, how do we integrate those social sciences and the human impacts? That you'll read a climate article, 3,000 words, and you may have one sentence where it says, oh, by the way, humans are going to be impacted, and they go on and on. And so we as the science community, my opinion, we need to do a better job of talking about that human impact much, much better, so we can talk to the politicians and stuff that you kind of brought up earlier.
Yeah, preach on. I've been, goodness gracious, I've been preaching that for a long time. And what we do, we often forget about the people that we serve, and we don't communicate with them well, and we don't understand them. And there's a break in the link there. And we have to have a relationship with the people that we serve. And if we don't understand them, and if we don't understand the social science part of this, we're all in trouble. And that's why people like Kim, who's normally on the show, a social scientist, has been so critical in what I do. And I would imagine it's the same with what you do. So James A., go ahead. You got a question.
Yeah, Colonel Gramillion, I guess my next question is, when we're talking about applying hard science to social science, what lessons can we learn from other disciplines that have the same issue, like medical science, that also have to communicate hard science to improve quality of life for people?
So the sarcastic part of me would say, do they really do a very good job? I mean, that's, and that can be debatable, see COVID. And so, it's such as you guys know, in your day-to-day profession, everybody's a weather expert. Just ask them, right? And so you guys make it so much easier for people to be experts, And so I think it's even harder, than a medical community does, just because everybody just thinks they're, so much better and smarter. And I could have told you to take an umbrella today, the comments that you guys, the snide comments that y'all have. And so it's hard, and I don't know if there's really an equivalent as easy. But your point's well taken. I think there are probably different things, and I would even say that looking back in history, and I kind of alluded to it, I think there's anthropological ways that we can look back in and then try to apply some of those historical lessons, so we don't make those same mistakes again. So I know it's not a very good answer because I really don't have a great answer, but it's tough. And again, I live in the same world you guys do, where it's the remarks about, hey, it'd be nice, you guys get paid. I heard this a lot in my career, and I was a military meteorologist. It must be nice to get paid to be 50% wrong all the time, right? And so, and so I'm like, thanks. How about you sit in my chair?
Yeah.
And when you have generals throwing things at you because they're upset because you didn't give them the right forecast, and then see how well you really do.
Well, I gotta wonder. I'm sorry, but I gotta wonder, Mike. Though, like you pointed out, that this would have been maybe a little easier to communicate to the public three or 3.5 years ago, pre-COVID, back when everyone wasn't trying to cancel everyone else, and social media has become so toxic that it really makes me worry about our future. How we're gonna. I mean, the sun set over there a little while ago, but I'll swear someone here in Austin will argue with me and tell me no, the sun rises in the west, and or I'll cancel you. I mean, I'm serious about that. And it seems like science it almost seems twice as hard to communicate things nowadays just because of where we are with that.
Well, my answer to that, and when I had the uniform on and had the opportunity to deal at the federal government, because I towards the end of the last 7 years of my career, of the 27 years, I was either the Air Force or DoD representative to the federal government enterprise. And the organization that puts out the National Climate Assessment, it's called USGRCP, Global Change Research Program. One of the things I would fight with them a lot was, you got great scientists, but you poor communicators, because the scientists think they're great communicators. And I said, what this government needs, and I still make the same argument now that I don't have is that you need translators, in between the scientist and John Q. Public. Again, what you guys do on a professional daily basis. But from a climate science and a weather science, there's a huge valley of death between the two communities. And I am a pretty large critic of the federal government organization, and that's what I was paid professionally to do, to have 1 foot in science and 1 foot, and I'm James, you'll appreciate this, and 1 foot talking to the Army grunts that if you get bigger than one syllable words, they lose you really quick. You lose them really quickly, right? You can understand father-in-law on that one. But it's such a vital thing that I think our nation in the science community, there's such a large gap between the science community and the decision makers of John Q. Public. And again, how do we do a better job of communicating on that?
Yeah.
Colonel Gramillion, I got one smart aleck comment to make. And when you delivered a forecast that didn't quite verify, I'm pretty sure you didn't follow that up to generals who complained about it by saying, yeah, but batting 300 gets you in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, no, that didn't work. So let me so let me give you an example. I kind of alluded to it earlier. So when I was deployed to Saudi Arabia, we had a airstrike that we were trying to do against Saddam Hussein's. Won't name the time frame, won't name anything other than just kind of the generalities of it. And so I walked into his office and said, hey, sir, are you still planning to drop those bombs at this time? And he looked at me and says, yeah. And he goes, what's your problem? I said, well, you're going to have laser guided bombs. There's going to be clouds over your target, and he cussed like a sailor. He threw a stapler at me and said, GD, when am I going to be able to fly this mission? And I mean, and I'm like, oh my goodness. I said, move it an hour to the left, and you should be able to get those airplanes in to drop the bombs, because we had SEAL teams on the ground using laser designated pointers. And then you go back to your point and you pray to the weather gods that I hope that I read all the material right, I used my forecast funnel right, and all that other stuff. And you hope to God that you go back. And so that mission that night, dropped the bomb successfully. And then I was, to your point, I was really nervous going in and saying, so how well did I do? And literally, the planes dropped the bombs, and as they were pulling out of the target, they went through the clouds. If I would have been 5 minutes later, the whole mission would have been scrapped. And I just missed it by 5 minutes. And so there's a lot of those things where you hope that you did your really good forecast funnel and that you understood it. And there were times that I got dressed down and yelled at and told, when you come back again the next time, make sure you're right. So you go back, and every time you go back and you learn what you did wrong. You kind of do a lessons learned. You do a hot wash on yourself. What did I miss on the forecast funnel? Because those timing issues are so vital. Unlike how the National Weather Service does it in the military, that timing is so crucial. And I gave you a perfect example of that. So I never was that much of a smart aleck, because I knew that I would probably literally get beat up, literally, and thrown out of the office, and not told to come back. So you go in with like a little scaredy cat. You say what you have to say, and then you run. So
that's kind of like forecasting for Coach Saban. It's the same kind of thing. I mean, I feel that. So what do you see as a role for the emerging technologies like AI and remote sensing going forward with water management?
So personally, I have a love-hate relationship with AI ML. I'm old school in the fact that meteorology is an art, right? I mean, yes, the best weather models could be, run the fastest, biggest, fastest, and smartest, but there's still an art piece, as you guys knew. And so you tweak the art aspect of it. What I'm afraid of with AI ML is the training misses that art aspect of the meteorologist. And so I think AI ML in the current instantiation is good for golf forecasting. Hey, it's you take your umbrella, you can go out and do things, because it's a good trend analysis mechanism for AI ML at this moment in its science capabilities. But boy, howdy, I was talking last week to a class. London Heathrow has 3 large retaining ponds on the west end of the departure of London Heathrow. Every time the weather models do not pick up those fog, and guess what happens when you get advection? You get fog over the west end of the runways at London Heathrow. But the models will never, ever pick up those retention ponds at the end of Heathrow. And so that art piece, because you're a local knowledge kind of person, with certain advection conditions and everything else, that you may have to shut down a runway at Heathrow because that. So that's where I worry about AI ML, to be honest, is that art aspect of it. And today, when I see younger people, well, the model says, well, that's great. But my old school brain still does the old school. I was taught on a CRT to do forecasting, and where you can mark on the CRT and you can look at fronts and you can mark on it and advance it back and say, okay. And I used to take a pen and say, okay, pen. Yep. In 4 hours, this is when the front's going to pass, really old school way. But the new generation of model readers don't understand the art. So I do worry about that aspect of it. So, but I think it helps us to understand trends better and faster. But it helps us understand golf trends better, to be honest. And again, Micro Million's opinion on AI ML.
Troy and I go back to the grease pencil plexiglass days.
Yep.
Way back. So Colonel, what keeps you up at night What's your greatest concern when it comes to water resources, water security for the United States, for our country here?
I think it's back to Troy's part. What he said earlier is really not understanding. We fight over the Colorado River and the allocations that were done in the late 1800s. We have not advanced those water allocations of that was, oh, by the way, in a very, very snowy year when those allocations were made. And so I think we're stuck in the past and our understanding. And I think by population increases, and even over the last, in the South, the population, when you see the NOAA, this is what the climate disasters are, and it says, oh, we've seen more increases but what they forget to tell you in the perspective is, since they've started those charts, 100 more million people have lived. And oh, by the way, 50 million of that 100 million lives in the southeast part of the United States. And so I think we've got to grasp better, are we going to be able to continue to do business as usual with wastewater treatment, with drinking water? Why is Intel continuing to build chip manufacturing in Phoenix, right? They don't have water, and you got to have lots of water for productions of semiconductors. So why are we just continuing to plow ahead, knowing that there's, that drop of water can only be split so many ways? And so, I do worry about us really not fully grasping, and this is a little bit, hyperbole a little bit, but are we going to end up like the Mayans and the Aztecs, because we just kept plowing through, using water till one day we looked around and goes, oh crap, we have nothing. And so the education of the water is probably what keeps me up in the United States.
What about, Mike, in the last week, I think it's been the last week, guys, y'all would know, but our FBI director, Christopher Wray, gave comments in regard to the vulnerability, frankly, of various infrastructure in this country, whether it be electrical grid or whatever, and even commerce, computer hacking and this sort of thing. But I'm wondering about water supply vulnerability, Mike, because it seems like if you had someone from outside that really wanted to get to the United States, one of the, I think, easy way for them to be able to do is through our water supplies. I assume that's something you've got to think about as well in your position at the place that you are now.
We do look at it. We saw about a year and a half ago, there was SCADAs that were hacked in Florida.
Yeah.
And even if it was no hacking, let's pick Jackson, Mississippi, and all their water infrastructure issues, or Flint, Michigan, or some of the other ones. And so, our adversaries know very well our dependency, and are for the long game for sure, and understand how dependent a society is on weather. So or on water. And so it is a big thing. Good old Dan Brown in one of his novels, poisoned the water in Italy, if you remember right, that started that contagion. So there's definitely, things that we should look about, because you can live without bread for a long time. You can't live that many days without water. And so if you really want to take a society to its knees pretty quickly, take water away from them. Mm-hmm. So we've got to figure out what that means and for our future, the future of who we are as a United States, for sure.
Well, Mike, I even hate to bring that up here, but I think as a society that we can afford not to discuss this. And I appreciate your feedback.
Well, right or wrong, 3 decades of being military, I kind of get blunt a little bit about it. And so I know that's a fault of myself, but we really do have to have these conversations. It's not sexy. It's not, not something somebody wants to talk about, as you pointed out earlier, but we really do need to understand our United States water security issues. Again, a couple days and then we're done without water. So what does that mean, for it? And there's other things like commerce and transportation up down the Mississippi, Do we, what does it mean for, food security for our own selves in the future? What is it? How do we got to really look at adaptation. The community looks at mitigation a lot. I don't think they look at adaptation. So, what does it mean if I have, 15 more million people immigrating into our country, or if we have, or our natural human population in the United States continues to increase, yet the spigot either stays the same or is getting less, again, you can only split the water so many ways before you start running into a real crisis.
Colonel, what happens? You brought up Flint and Jackson, and while those were comparatively mid to small scale disruptions, what happens to a major metropolitan area if the drinking water supply is disrupted like that? I mean, we run out of time fast, as you discussed. What do we do? What's the backup?
I don't know if we really have, right? I mean, we see this playing out in California right now, right? I mean, before all these atmospheric rivers and all that stuff, all their surface water was being drained, So where do they go? They go to groundwater. And so then you start taking more groundwater. That's not as easily replaceable as surface, as you guys know. And so, how do we do water management better than what we do? And I think, large cities and other things have to look at their mix of surface and groundwater, and how do you come through it? We did a study in my center because we were requested to look at what does El Nino mean to rice production in India, for their 1.6 billion people. And, one of the things that concerned about is so what does that mean for production of rice for them? And, and how did that all work out? And I think as we were doing research on India, discovered that like 5% of the population of India has 100% access of water. And even the richest of rich in India, they're lucky to have their water on 20% of the time in India. And so then, as you know, if you don't have the positive pressure and then you get leakage, and then you get the disease that comes with, not having clear or clean water. And it's just like cascading impacts that I don't think we as a nation quite understand, on the disease and the food insecurity and some of these other things that we got to stop fussing about the Colorado River and look down, look a little bit more in our crystal ball and have these real come to Jesus. That's what I was learning. That's how I learned, have these come to Jesus meetings, if you will, to have these honest, good conversations.
If the population of Phoenix were to increase by 30% and Los Angeles by 30%, is that sustainable
no.
What happens to these big cities in the Southwest if they keep growing?
Well, I mean, we see it with Lake Mead. I haven't recently checked the levels, but since all this rain that they've had, but I mean, Hoover Dam provides 40% or provides power and electricity to 40 million people in the desert Southwest, just that dam alone. And we were seeing before all this rain, the Hoover Dam was at 100 feet more of depth to drop before it got to Deadpool, which means you can't spin the turbines and you got no water resources. So we were slowly, dangerously getting close, even with the current population. And so it is highly unsustainable. Again, I referenced the Anasazi in the Pueblos and stuff. They squeezed as much blood out of that turnip as they could, but they got to a point that they had to just leave, and so they abandoned Mesa Verde and some of those other things. I believe if we don't have those kinds of conversations, I think there's going to have to be a population redistribution. I think the United States, personally, looking at the data, we have sufficient water. It's just the water's not where the people are. So a state like Alabama, we're very water blessed in the grander scheme of things. And so I've talked to some of the local politicians here, going, why don't you take advantage of that? Go to the intels and say, hey, we got abundant water supplies. Go and try to recruit the intels and those people to, again, raise up the standard of the Southeast and take advantage of the extra water and try to recruit those businesses that are so water dependent and come to states like Alabama or Mississippi or Louisiana, Georgia. And Georgia can be debatable with the lake out there, but I think there's some opportunities for economic development for sure, of bringing people to where the water is instead of just staking your claim and continuing to stick your head in the sand. You may get a mouthful of sand eventually one day. So
come to Alabama. We got plenty of water. So I do want to ask your opinion on the current situation out in California, your thoughts on what they're receiving now, and how does it make a big difference? Does it help?
It does help in the short term. I find, so when I was in the military, I'm going to weave my military back into this for a second. I was responsible for the whole providing forecasts for all of the western part of the United States. So I had to fuss with atmospheric rivers and cut off California lows and all the lovely stuff that comes out with western U.S. meteorology. And so what frustrated me, I was out there for 2 years, is it seemed like that part of the world has a very short-term memory and they forget. I can't tell you how many times I was frustrated. They'd get a big wildfire burn season and then the atmospheric rivers, and then they would be surprised that they would have these mudslides covering over the PCH. I'm like, really, dudes? I mean,
really? Yeah.
It's not a secret.
Do you think so?
Yeah. And so they have that bias a lot in there. And so I think we've seen this. I mean, it's an El Nino. El Ninos mean that the jet stream is dipping there and it allows all these, back in the day, I called them pineapple expresses. Now they're atmospheric rivers. Yep. Okay. So, it's not a new phenomenon, a new story. But then what are they doing from a water resource management perspective to store up the land of plenty while you got it, knowing that land of not is coming around the corner? And so I think it boils down to it's a classical El Nino right now. What's happening, classical El Nino setup. It's pumping the moisture from the Pacific, and I feel bad for the people, but again, Californians should know that this is not a new thing for them, but they seem to forget it. And so, again, that's my opinion. I'm sure people will be upset what I just said.
But another thing, too, guys, you got to look at, and this is a problem that I seem to run into, James, and Mike, is there are about up to million different flavors of El Nino. It doesn't mean that Central Texas gets the rain. It may mean we're going to flood James Spann out of his house in Birmingham underneath the pine trees. Or maybe we're going to drop it all on Tulsa like we did in the early 80s following a hydrometeorology AMS conference. That's a great story.
I was there.
I was there. And we haven't been invited back to Tulsa.
No, never.
Meteorologists have not come back to Tulsa. But the science of that, the public has gotten where they think, Mike, that El Nino, Austin, rain, lots of it. And there's so many different flavors. There's a range.
Yeah. And I think, again, where the science community fails us is the teleconnections. It's the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It's the Arctic Oscillation. Those decadal oscillations either heighten or dampen an El Nino event.
Yep.
And I think what gets lost is because we don't do a very good job on those teleconnections as well as we should, or produce products that help, it's El Nino, right? But what phase is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation right now? Right. Oh, by the way, it's negative. And so we need to do a much better job of the teleconnection science, to your point, to look into the future, the subseasonal forecasting, to go, yeah, this oscillation is dampening it, but this one's heightening it. And so and then I'm a big analog character. I like looking back and saying, okay, these are the different phases of all these different oscillations, and go back and look and say, hey, this region is going to be similar because of the different phases, and then come back and say, everybody said this one was going to be the worst ever. Well, it's not. It's not going to approach 1997. Yeah. It's already on its way and starting to decline. The National Weather Service has come online and said this El Nino event will be done in March or April. Yeah. And so, and then striving towards neutral and maybe eventually on to La Nina. But, so I think that the teleconnection science has to do a much better job, to your point, Troy, of telling the story. It's not just the 3-4 block in the Pacific Ocean and the whole world revolves around that particular, and oh, by the way, NOAA does not have that many towed arrays out there anyway to truly measure the Pacific Ocean, so we're really short of observations. And so, if NASA's Earth science budget's $4 billion with a B, maybe we should buy more sensors and do a little bit more science. Now, again, I'm going to get hate mail from NASA people, but okay, some of them know who I am, so in the upper tiers, so they won't expect anything less from me.
No, we're all used to hate mail. So, Mike, for me, and I've been doing this a long time, as I get older, I realize how much we don't know when it comes to forecasting the weather. Practitioners, what I do. Yep. I often talk about frustrations, like air mass thunderstorms in summer. I cannot tell people at 7 o'clock on a July morning when or where it's going to rain at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I know they will be there, but I don't exactly know where and when. And I cannot help people that are trying to plan a picnic or a baseball game or something outdoors. In the hydrology world, are there any frustrations for you involving knowledge that you need that you don't have now?
So again, I live in y'all's world in the meteorologist, but what I hear from the hydrology community, it's all y'all's meteorologists' fault because you can't get the timing right, you can't get the amount right. And I'm like, well, do you ever come and talk to us, meteorologist side of the fence? And what are you complaining about? And so they blame the meteorology side of their equation that, our models are always wrong, the timing's wrong, the amount, the QPF is always wrong. And so I do hear that a lot. And I push back and say, well, how about you improve your data assimilation capabilities just at the same time that the meteorologists should be improving theirs? And so I think there is the United States, and I used to tell this to Louis Uccellini all the time, that the United States sits about 5th in their modeling capability in the world. He would get so mad at me, and then I would just poke at him and say, "Hey, my 18-year-old forecasters that hated math in high school can out forecast your green meteorologist," and that would just spin him out of control. I loved doing that to him all the time when we were in big federal meetings. But the United States needs to learn, my opinion, from the Europeans or the ECMWF and some of those. It's funny to watch TV meteorologists. They tend to go to the European models before they even use the own United States ones because it's a whole lot more accurate. And so part of that is that data assimilation front end of how the Europeans and the British do it. And I think with smart people like Neil, and I would poke on Neil if he was on here, the smart people like Neil and with Epic and stuff, and making a unified model, because that's what the other nations do, is it's a big unified model. I think once the United States fully grasps the unified model, does data assimilation so much better, I think it'll cascade into the hydrologist's job much better. And so you can get timing, and now I'm going to contradict myself saying that about the AI ML. I think there are opportunities with machine learning to model between strain gauges and all those kinds of things to kind of begin to understand that trend analysis from strain gauge X to strain gauge Y. And when is that height, that height of that particular river crest, if I don't have, if I'm a city between those two gauges, when can I better expect it? And I think machine learning, it could be some of that filler for trend analysis for observations that I think we should take advantage of. So I said how much I dislike it. Now I'm telling you how much I like it. I think there are definitely opportunities to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, if Neil was here, he would have many things to say at this point, but
Yeah,
he could not make it. In fact, we think he has a hangover from AMS in Baltimore last week. So
it's funny because Neil, when he was at Panasonic, when I was in a senior position in the Air Force, he'd come through talking about all of his wonderful Panasonic things. And then when he became a deputy administrator, I was sitting in his office. So, it's been kind of funny, the two different sides of the coin of Neil Jacobs. So over the course of my career.
So our hour is almost up, but I got to ask a few more questions real quick. You talked about the political stuff. How do you avoid that? It is so bewildering when you're trying to establish policies with the political polarization we have. How do you avoid that?
So the one thing the military taught me very well was to be apolitical, because you try not to have an opinion on one way or the other. So, one side of the fence thinks that you're rowing in their swim lane, and the other side thinks you. And so I work really hard to try to swim right in the middle. So a fence person. And I think my career has been pretty successful by being apolitical and trying to, just the facts, ma'am, kind of thing, right? Where you just tell, and then they can spin it out of control. And then the organization that I lead right now, we call ourselves kind of the myth busters. There's a narrative that keeps spinning, and we kind of politely come up to them and say, well, but that's not what the data says, and then they can choose whether or not they want to continue to spin it. But at least we're kind of a gut check, if you will, from a myth busters to go, but that's not what the data says. And so it's really important in my career and in the position and what I do now to try to stay very apolitically on it. And again, both sides of the climate scientists, think I'm on their side, and which is great, because then that means I'm doing my job the right way. And then just slowly begin to nudge them to say, hey, this is what the science says, and this is what the data says. And it's kind of like boiling a lobster, before you know it's done. But it's an ultra marathon for sure. You can't. This is not a 100-meter sprint. You got to take the long game.
Got one for you too, Mike. This is kind of unrelated to what we've talked about, but I want to go back to James' span in my time as we got started out many years ago when Doppler weather radar came in, WSR 88D originally. Most people don't realize this now, I don't think, Mike. Maybe I'm wrong, but one of the biggest supporters of that whole program were the people involved in the the water side of the business, because they were interested in knowing you can only put rain gauges in so many places, and they were really interested in seeing what the hydrometeorology rainfall amounts and what the radar could tell us. And here we are in 2024 now on the 5th day of February recording here. Has that worked out? Because I know it's still a teaching process, and you have to teach the radar to some degree. You have to tell it that. But that's one thing. I mean, tornado vorticity signatures are pretty, and get nice stuff for. We're seeing stuff in dual pole that we sit here and we just, fall over each other about. But I'm wondering about those estimated rainfall totals that we see from radars, and has that worked out how the people envisioned that it might at one point early?
I think early on they didn't know how to use the radar, just like you didn't know what a TDS signature was, right? You guys learned about all that, when it first came out. I think it's much better. The National Severe Storms Lab and others have definitely helped advance that science. I think there's still, as you guys know, even doing your jobs on a daily basis, you got to be careful about range folding and, and all those kinds of different things. So I think it can still be better. I think dual polos help. I think this next generation weather radar that they're talking about with the arrayed scans, I think will help with the different many points to, as it rotates around. I think will make that next evolutionary jump, if we can get that off the ground and replacing all the 88Ds with a whatever 24 E's or whatever they're going to call it. Yep. But yeah, I think there's still a long ways to go with radar rainfall estimations for sure. And I think that scanned array radar that they've been talking about for 5-10 years now, but it took forever to get the 88D. I mean, I'm old enough also to remember the 74C, right? Before that. So
yeah.
I love the 74C because you can interrogate a storm much better, I think, than a 88D. But that's just me being an old dog.
Colonel, one more question, and again, a little esoteric, but you had eagles on your collar. What is the biggest leadership lesson you learned from your time in the military that you pass on to your staff?
So, a lot of people, when you get up to that rank, people walk in and think that, that everybody's supposed to serve you being at the top of the pyramid. And I always invert the pyramid and say, if I'm doing my job right, the leader at the top of the pyramid is now at the bottom, and I should be a servant leader to the people, to defend them, to work with them. And I think that you gain. I found that by inverting the pyramid, the leadership pyramid, and putting you at the bottom to serve everybody above you, but really below you. I think you get loyalty, you get respect, and then to that James question about apolitical, and then deliver what you tell people you're going to deliver, I think goes a really long way. And I think over the course of my career, by mentoring people, that you're a servant leader and that you deliver on what you promise, because there's a lot of talk and no action. And I think people are thirsty for action, but we just talk a lot. And so I think, again, one of the reasons I stood up the center was because I was frustrated being in the military of the bureaucracy and everything about environmental security or climate security, whatever you want to call it. And I said I could do it faster, better, cheaper by being on the outside and still seeming like I have the uniform on and delivering it, treat my people the right way. And then if they ask me a question, if you gave it to a DOE lab, you got a 12-month science project, I turn things down 2 months or less, and they get an answer quicker, because they have a burning question. And so those two items are probably what I would say.
Excellent.
And I got one more, and I know we've kept you past the hour here, Mike.
No,
but I wanted.
You can keep me as long as you want. Seriously.
Oh, good. You good. You can stick with us to the end of the show. I feel better now. So, talk about your vision for the future of the Global Water Security Center. Where do you want the center to be in, say, 10 years? Where do we go from here?
So, in my perfect world, so I get frustrated, and so a gentleman that's been in this water business a lot longer than me said, his name is John Oldfield, and he said, Mike, we'll always have drought, but it'd be nice one day not to have famine. Because it's just a long period of drought till you get to a crisis of a famine. And I think our nation, our science fails these countries on famine. Now, part of it's governance and it's all. So in Mike Vermillion's perfect world, in 10 years, if I get my way and I can have relationships with the science community and we all be rolling in the same direction. I mean, I'd love, and I'm just going to pick a country. Well, I won't pick a country. If I knew that country X, looking at the seasonal forecast, the kind of between now 12 months, if I could see in my crystal ball by the science that tells me, hey, country X, they're going to have a famine, because it would be And what I would love to do by the data and the analysis that we do, go, hey, World Food Program, USAID, State Department, I see this coming. Start engaging country X. I know that your country's governance is poor. I know that you don't get the food to the people that need the food, and begin to kind of put the internal pressure on a country X, to say, we ain't going to let you drive your country into famine, because we've got the science rotating good enough that, and so in 10 years, I would love the opportunity to be, an analysis capability. And I know like the National Security Council has told me that, Mike, it'd be wonderful if we had 4 or 5 of your organizations to help our country do these engagements. And so I think having a seat at the table, influencing these geopolitical conversations, or at least providing the data to let the talking heads, the politicals, they can't claim ignorance anymore. I want them to be informed. And so, in my perfect world, when they sit at a table, they're at least informed with data. You hope that they ask your opinion on the data. And then they make a change, and like this country that I was alluding to, that we can do a much better job. So for instance, the general that's responsible for Central and South America, her staff has said, hey, Mike, is there any way that you can create talking points for her to do engagements? So whether it's a military to military engagement or a civilian to civilian. And what I found in my career is much like, if you don't know anybody, talking about the weather is a very easy topic. Hey, it's awful hot. I can't believe I'm sweating, all those. But that's universal throughout the world, is weather and climate is a very easy topic, to get into having these cross table topics. What I hope is a center like mine provides the data, provides the analysis, so when they're sitting on the US's side, that now they have talking points to engage. So like right now, Ecuador is having a really hard time with drought, and there's some flooding issues on one of their dams. And so can we provide an analysis outlook on what an El Nino or La Nina is going to do, and maybe we do an engagement in that country to improve geopolitical will, and out there. So that's my perfect world, if I could get to that point.
And that's outstanding, because ultimately it's how it affects people. And that's
Correct.
The bottom line. And thank you so much for your work and your passion and what you've done there so far, Mike. And since you can stick around, you will have to come up with a pick of the week here before the show wraps up in a few minutes. So you got about 15 minutes, but you need to think of something really cool that's weather, climate related, hydrology, anything. And so we will do that at the end of the show. But we're going to pause very quickly. We're going to hear from Tony Rice in his astronomy report. We've got Jen in This Week in Tornado History. We'll come back with a weather roundup. We'll discuss a very fascinating weather situation right now. And we've got picks of the week and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
We're just about 2 months away from the total solar eclipse on April 8th, 2024. And communities along the path stretching from Texas to Maine, they're making plans for visitors, a lot of them. For the first time in history, a solar eclipse will pass over 2 major league ballparks during the regular season, the Texas Rangers in Arlington and the Cleveland Guardians. I talked with a couple of folks in front offices from minor league teams that had the big bright light in the sky turn out on their games back in 2017. Most of them turned it into a day or more long STEM event with speakers, other entertainment, and of course, keepsake eclipse glasses. I also learned that the choice of when to hold the game in relation to the partial eclipse, and especially that period of totality, is as much an art as a science. You see, when the sun sets, the light goes away gradually, but during a total eclipse, it disappears instantly. When you're responsible for the safety of 52 players on the field and thousands of fans in your ballpark, you've got to think about these things. I talked with the front office of the Bowling Green Hot Rods, the single-A affiliate of the Tampa Bay Rays. They scheduled first pitch for 10:35 a.m., about 3 hours before totality. The plan was to end the game with 15 or 20 minutes to spare, plenty of time to get fans and players safely in position. Talking with the GM, he recalls sweating it as the game ran long and that planned post-game pre-totality time was cut down to just a couple of minutes. He also noted how his colleagues running ball clubs in the path of the 2024 eclipse, they've got it easy. The pitch clock has made the time a game might end a lot more predictable. Out in Oregon, the Salem Kaiser volcanoes, they leaned into the timing a little bit more. They scheduled their game to begin during the partial eclipse. Noah Petro, a NASA planetary geologist and current project scientist on the Artemis program, he threw out that first ceremonial pitch. Miss Oregon sang the national anthem and the game got underway, as the partial eclipse was also underway. The sun winked out at the top of the first, and the umpire called for the first ever eclipse delay. And I'm told that Volcanoes pitcher John Timmons also chalked up probably the highest ERA of any pro pitcher during a partial solar eclipse. But that's not what the 5,300 fans in attendance are going to remember. The game is also immortalized in Cooperstown. The balls from that ceremonial first pitch, plus the next pitch after totality, they're in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, along with a game-worn jersey created specially for the event, with the Volcanoes logo on the front surrounded by a fiery sun. Another jersey went to the Smithsonian Museum of American History. Now, back here in 2024, if we look at the Guardians' regular season schedule, you'll see one game with a TBD start time, April 8th. The front office tells me they're still finalizing plans with the city with public safety in mind. Traffic's a big concern because, in addition to the 40,000 fans at Progressive Field, another 50,000 are expected at nearby Great Lakes Science Center for a day-long family event there. Based on what I've found, the Texas Rangers appear to have noped out of the whole thing, sticking with a normal 7:05 p.m. first pitch 2 hours after the whole show in the sky is over. It's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, a squall line moved through Texas and produced 4 significant tornadoes on February 8th, 1935. At tornadotalk.com, we have a detailed summary about the deadliest tornado to occur. It was an F2 that tracked from near Nineveh through Grapeland along the 24.6-mile path. 12 people were killed, 70 others were injured. The Murray Plantation was laid to waste. The tornado first developed 12 miles northeast of Centerville near Nineveh. It roared through the Story and Darcy Plantation, where several tenant homes and a commissary were leveled. 15 people were injured. The funnel then crossed the Trinity River and roared into the Murray Cotton Plantation. Arch Murray, his wife, and 3 children were eating dinner when their house began to shake and they heard the wind howling. They took cover in a room on the east side of the house, and that was the only part that was left standing. Tragically, others on the farm were not as lucky. One woman was thrown 400 feet from her leveled cabin. A man was, quote, sawed in half when he was thrown through a barbed wire fence. 11 people were killed at the plantation. 50 others were injured. Another woman was killed at the nearby Herman Beasley farm. For our summary, we were able to find the names of the 12 people who died. We try to do that as much as we can to honor those who passed away. Please check out our summary at tornadotalk.com. Join the American Meteorological Society's Weather Band at amsweatherband.org to connect with weather enthusiasts all over the world, plus 10,000 plus members of the AMS. Swap stories and data, join photo contests and interactive webinars, or test your trivia knowledge. Full membership is just $12 per year. And don't forget to join WeatherBand February 29th and March the 1st from noon to 4 for the annual virtual Jamposium. As requested by WeatherBand members, the Jamposium will cover topics from climate change and severe weather to science communication, citizen science, and the April 2024 total solar eclipse. Go to amsweatherband.org to get started.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
We really got some interesting weather going on here. Again, the show is being recorded Monday night, the 5th of February, and we had a really fascinating upper low that spun through the deep south here yesterday and today. And where we are, yesterday, it was a cold, miserable, all-day soaker. And Mike, I think you probably had the same issue in Tuscaloosa. And then you get in the warm sector of this thing, and they had some really photogenic tornadoes near Valdosta, Georgia, and near Jacksonville, Florida. Very interesting to watch that. And at the same time, we've got the mess in the West. But Troy, you're kind of in between all this, aren't you?
Yeah, in between it, and then you look at the things, James, like the last couple of nights, and I'm recalling this out of my brain, so you'll know what that means. We've been less than 50 below in Fairbanks the last couple of nights. There is a lot of cold air back up there, and you've got to be concerned with that. The soaker of the rain, James, that went to the southeast underperformed, unfortunately, across Texas late last week. I forget, the QPFs were inch and a half, and some spots got that, but it wasn't as much as we thought it would be, and a little bit of a severe weather threat on Friday, and that kind of worked out as I thought it would to our southwest a little bit, more toward the Rio Grande. But, you know, if I'm sitting here on the 5th day of February and temperatures in Fairbanks are 51 below, and they're setting records up there, I'm concerned for someone. I don't believe that just disappears off the face of the earth. So,
yeah, I tell people all the time, at some point that air's got to move. It's like dumping
Yeah.
out a bag of sand.
right.
Exactly how it kind of spreads out, you don't know that, and
Right.
you know, but in how shallow it's going to be. But yeah, I agree. I've been doing this a long time, and you see a minus 50 F in Fairbanks. At some
Yeah.
point, somebody's going to get plowed here. So, and the first one that's going to get it, it's James. So whatever happens is his fault. So what do you say, James?
Sounds like a show title to me. Somebody's gonna get plowed.
So when does it when do we get the big chill again, James?
We know it's on the other side. It's got to come over mountains. So there's potential that it just leaks out into the Pacific and doesn't really come down to the lower 48. There's potential. I mean, I keep looking at the Euro ensembles and there's no hint at all that it's looking my way. We get into, if we hit March 1st, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, whatever happens, it's James's fault.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's
I read
true.
it in the comments.
Yeah, of course, I saw on Facebook there's going to be a blizzard and it's going to be 20 below zero here in Alabama the 1st of March. So
Yeah,
when you see it on Facebook,
I mean, we saw
know
the
it's
8 to
true.
14 day, guys, that the 8 to 14 day outlook from CPC indicated that strip of colder temperatures and precipitation in the western Gulf Coast and into the southeast U.S. But I don't know, a little uneasy here, just kind of sitting there watching it.
Hey, Mike, where were you in 1993? Out of just curiously.
So I had just graduated from the University of Kansas, and I was on my way to my very first duty station in South Korea.
Okay, so we had the famous blizzard of 93 here.
Yeah.
That was our snowstorm of record, and it was in mid-March. And the official total at Birmingham was 13 inches, but some parts of the state had 2 feet, and that's not drifts, that's 24 inches of snow. And so I do warn people, we can have big snow here in March. Winter's got a long way to go. But yeah, it's very fascinating. And of course, we've had the problems out in California. We've all seen that. And goodness, the Sierra Nevadas, how much snow are they going to get? 100 inches from this?
Talking
It's
6 inches an hour in places.
Yeah.
I follow, I think it's on Facebook, the CHP unit that covers Donner Pass, and they will post these pictures and videos, and goodness gracious, it's just absolutely insane. But having said all that, we're going to morph over into picks of the week. This is where everybody goes around the horn and shares something that is weather related. It can be a website, hardware, software, book, anything remotely close to weather. So let's start with Troy Kimmel and let's see what he's got. Troy.
Well, mine was interesting, and even James and the two James and Mike. I mean, to me, this was interesting. Been following the drought monitor and watching our drought at least give way a little bit. It's not gone in Texas. And what had really been interesting, Mike, was the drought, particularly we'd seen from northeastern Louisiana into southeast Arkansas and across northern Mississippi. I mean, this is not an area you look for that kind of drought. We saw last Thursday morning's drought monitor, and I was just sitting there and I've been getting some, what do you call it, tweets or X's or whatever they're called nowadays from weather office up in Memphis. And there's a flash flood watch for a group of counties in northwest Mississippi. And I used that in my class. I wanted to see awareness. what people could tell me, why is that? What's going on? And had students going all over the place. But what was really interesting was, of course, it was the Corps of Engineers at Vicksburg. They had come out on Lake Butler, that's there in northwest Mississippi, and basically a dam that they are, at least I think it's fair to say, they're concerned about. Is not imminent for failure, but because of the snow melt, James and Mike, that we'd seen over that part of an additional rainfall, even in a drought situation, you had that going on. So I thought it was interesting. I put up on the classroom overhead, I put the website with the drought monitor, and then I showed a watch warning advisory map from the National Weather Service with a flash flood watch right smack dab in the middle. And my pick of the week is the Corps of Engineer site out of Vicksburg and their press release on why they asked the Weather Service to do that.
And I'm glad you told me that. I just saw those counties in green. I thought it was bad data. It was a coding error, and they just missed the end of the watch. But I did not know that, so I have learned something.
It is, and again, I'll stress Corps of Engineers, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong if you know something different. But their press release indicated and stressed that this didn't appear to be imminent, but they had some concern on the infrastructure.
And a flash flood watch was issued. All right, James Adelot, give us a pick of the week. Go.
Well, we had some excitement Friday night with a 5.1 earthquake, but my pick of the week is the Eagle Cam at Big Bear, California, which is about 75 miles east of Los Angeles, up in the mountains at about 7,500 feet or so. But they are just getting hammered. And that eagle is just sitting there in the nest, covered in snow. And apparently it's no big deal to the eagle except for her eggs. That's perfectly fine.
No problem. No problem. Snow, no problem here. That is very mesmerizing. It's a great pick. Mine, it is an article called "When the Storm Online is Worse Than the One Outside," and it's about disinformation and the social media lunacy. We all fight that, but I just thought that summed up the situation pretty well. I mean, there's just and people will buy anything. And Troy, we've said this how many times on this show? We have lost in this country our ability to do critical thinking.
Absolutely.
And it's just insane. It is absolute insanity. But anyway, that'll be my pick. And all of these links will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com, in the show notes. So, Mike, we've stalled long enough. Give us something cool.
Oh, my goodness. I was trying to debate what the cool thing I had said. I'm going to bring forth a other side of my world that I didn't talk about tonight, and that's space weather. Had the opportunity to be the DoD rep on 2019 and release of the National Space Weather Strategy. I want to do a shout out to the Space Weather Prediction Center at NOAA and some of the great work that they do to understand what sunspots do. I mean, we normally see auroras coming out of that, but they do a lot of fantastic work on understanding. And there's right now, if you go onto their website, you'll notice a new sunspot region rotating onto the sun that could cause some really good auroras in the future. So shout out to space weather folks, which most people don't think space and weather go in the same sentence, but it has a dramatic input. So that's my shout out is to SWPC, as it's known.
It's a great pick. So when is the next Carrington event?
Oh my goodness. So in 2012 we missed a Carrington event by 3 days.
Wow.
So in 2012, and I got in a fight with the National Academy on this particular issue. It was probably in 3 orders of magnitude worse than the Carrington event. And that particular event, they saw the aurora in Cuba. And the telegraph systems, they shocked all the operators. We missed it by 3 days of having one of these events. And we've been talking about water crisis, but if that happens to today's electronic world, we would not have any electronics because it would be just like an EMP going over. So we don't know, but we missed one by 3 days in 2012.
And I think it's important to say it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right?
That is absolutely correct.
And what do you do to prepare for something like this? I mean, the individuals, the government, what do you do? I mean,
well, so I've been involved in those conversations. I've lost shouting matches at the White House about this particular issue. There is at the Lagrangian point number 1, there is an aging satellite that is kind of a picket fence to give us a heads up on what kind of events would, what kind of disaster it would be. And so we do have a very short time. I recommended to federalize the power grid. In 1989, we saw one of those events cascading, and some folks in the Buffalo area actually isolated the northeast United States away from Quebec, and the effects didn't cascade into the northeast. But there are things that we as a nation could do, again, to not stick our heads in the sand, just like water, and protect some of our infrastructure for the future. So just like water, we got a lot of work to do on the space weather front too.
I have an old Kenwood TS520 transceiver with 6146 finals, old tube radios. From my glory days of ham radio as a kid, I've still got that thing in my attic, and it works really good. Now, if I can power it up somehow, that's the thing. But I've got a dipole and I've got the transceiver, so I figure I can get on the air.
There you go.
It's like we say this all the time. One of these days, ham radio operators will save the world. So, so Mike, we got to wrap up here. We're at a 90-minute limit. But is there anything you'd like to plug in terms of websites or maybe ways people can get additional information about what you do with the Global Water Security Center?
Yeah. So our website is ua-gwsc.org, and you can, on that website, you can kind of see the work and who we work for and what our intent is to move into the future. And so we're really excited. We're a growing team here at the University of Alabama, supporting our nation. And so that website, you can kind of get a look and feel of kind of what we do on a daily basis. And we're excited to be here in Alabama, to be a vital part of our nation right here in Tuscaloosa. And so we look forward to continuing to grow and have conversations with folks like you in the future.
And we appreciate your time tonight so much. Thanks for being on the show, and appreciate the hospitality I've been shown when I've been on your building there and your facility in Tuscaloosa. So thanks for your work. But we do have to wrap this thing up. If you're new here, WeatherBrains is typically on the air Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, and you can watch live on our YouTube channel or local television in Alabama. But the YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/weatherbrains. But we know that most of you listen, and we thank you if you watch or listen. And if you would like to get in touch with us, in the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. Jen had to drop off tonight, but she'll be back with the email of the week next week. But send us an email, and even though we can't read all of them, we try and answer all of them. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a marvelous week, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Great stuff.
Great show. Very, very good show. Thank you.
I appreciate y'all, James, for allowing me to come and talk. I mean, it's an important issue, and
it is. It really is, and it was great. And we fellas, we ended right at 8:30. We did it. All right. Thanks, guys. You'll have a great week. Appreciate it.